Hello, comrades and curious minds. This is Leon Trotsky, a name that resonates through the annals of revolutionary history. You're about to embark on a journey with me, exploring the tumultuous paths of the Russian Revolution, the rise of the Soviet Union, and the intricate dance of power and ideology that shaped the 20th century. From the depths of Siberian exile to the heights of political power, from the vibrant streets of Mexico City to the intellectual salons of Europe, my life was a relentless pursuit of a revolutionary ideal. But this isn't just a tale of past struggles, it's a story that echoes in today's quest for justice and equality. As we navigate through these episodes, you'll uncover the complexities of socialism, the intricacies of political upheaval, and the human costs of revolutionary change. I promise you a narrative filled with intrigue, betrayal, and the undying spirit of the fight for a fairer world. So, if you're ready to dive into the heart of one of history's most fascinating eras, told by someone who lived, breathed, and fought through it all, then hit that like button, subscribe, and join me on this extraordinary journey. Share your thoughts, engage in the discussion, and be part of a community that seeks to understand the past to shape a better future. Welcome to the revolution of ideas. Let's begin. I was born on November 7th, 1879, as Lev Davidovich Bronstein in the small village of Yanovka in present-day central Ukraine, then a part of the vast Russian Empire. My father, David Leontovich Bronstein, was a Jewish Ukrainian farmer, relatively prosperous by local standards. We lived in a remote part of Ukraine, over 20 kilometers from the nearest post office. My mother, Anna Lvovna, brought us up in a home where Russian and Ukrainian echoed off the walls more often than Yiddish. At the age of 8, a pivotal moment came when my father sent me to school in Odessa, a bustling city by the Black Sea. Odessa was a melting pot of cultures, increasingly influenced by Russian imperial policies. It was here that my rebellious spirit first flickered to life. I remember leading a strike against an unpopular teacher. I grew up during a transformative era in Russia. The country was rapidly catching up with its European neighbors in terms of political, cultural, and social developments. Between 1850 and 1900, Russia's population doubled, industrial production soared, and technological marvels like trains, telephones, and telegrams shrank distances, bringing European ideas closer to our doorstep. Russia, historically under the tight grip of czars, was on the brink of monumental changes. The abolition of serfdom in 1861 was a landmark event, freeing nearly 40% of the population from feudal bondage. The political landscape was buzzing with new ideas and movements. Figures like Mikhail Bakunin championed anarchism, advocating for the dismantling of centralized state authority. Socialist groups, inspired by Karl Marx, started to gain traction, particularly after the devastating famine of 1891, which took the lives of 500,000 Russians and stoked the fires of political unrest. These turbulent times profoundly influenced me. In my autobiography, My Life, I reflected on how 1891 marked a political turning point in Russia. The rising popularity of socialism during the 1890s eventually led to the formation of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, a coalition of various socialist groups. As a teenager, I was drawn to these revolutionary ideas. By 1896, I found myself in Nikolaev, joining the Narodniks and later establishing the South Russian Workers' Union. My political activities soon landed me in jail, but that only strengthened my resolve. In 1898, I became a member of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. My journey took a dramatic turn after my arrest in Nikolaev. Sentenced to 4 years of hard labor in Siberia, I married Alexandra Sokolovskaya, who bravely accompanied me into exile. Our daughters, Zinaida and Nina, were born there in the harsh Siberian wilderness. But I never completed my sentence. In 1902, with Alexandra's encouragement, I escaped, hidden in a hay wagon. As I made my way back to Europe, I adopted a new identity using a passport bearing the surname Trotsky, a name from my past in Odessa. From that moment, Lev Bronstein ceased to exist, and Leon Trotsky, the name you know me by, was born. After my daring escape from Siberia, I found myself in London, a city buzzing with political exiles from my homeland. Among them were key figures of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, who had fled the oppressive Tsarist regime. It was a thrilling time to be a revolutionary. In London, I met with George Plekhanov, a prominent figure in the Russian socialist movement and an editor of Iskra, The Spark, our influential socialist newspaper. With my penchant for writing and a flair for polemics, I quickly immersed myself in contributing to Iskra. It was here that I first encountered Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, better known as Lenin. Lenin was a man of intense convictions, a trait both admirable and divisive. His 1902 pamphlet, What is to be Done, sparked a fierce debate within our party. The core of this dispute, the future of our movement. On one side, Lenin and his followers, the Bolsheviks, argued for a focus solely on the industrial working class. On the other, a faction, including myself initially, believed in seeking broader support, including from the middle class. This ideological clash came to a head at the Second Congress of our party in 1903, held in Brussels and London. The outcome was a split into two factions, the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. Despite their names, majority and minority, respectively, the Mensheviks, under Julius Martov, held more popular support within the party. Initially, I sided with the Mensheviks, but as 1904 waned, I grew disillusioned with their overtures to the Russian liberals and middle class. Disenchanted, I stepped back from both groups, choosing to be an independent voice within the Russian socialist movement. As I navigated these complex political waters, a seismic event back home was about to shake the very foundations of the Russian Empire. January 22nd, 1905, marked the turning point. Father Georgy Gapon led a peaceful protest through St. Petersburg, only for it to end in a massacre. Bloody Sunday, the Tsar's troops opened fire on unarmed demonstrators, killing up to 1,000. This brutal act lit a fuse across Russia, sparking widespread strikes and igniting the revolution of 1905. This tumultuous period was further fueled by Russia's humiliating defeat in the Russo-Japanese War, a stark reminder of our nation's frailties. In a bid to quell the unrest, Tsar Nicholas II reinstated the Russian Duma, but it was too little, too late. The political landscape of Russia was changing irreversibly, especially in industrial cities like St. Petersburg, Moscow, and Riga. As for me, these events only deepened my resolve to fight for a new Russia. After the shocking events of Bloody Sunday, I knew I couldn't stay away from Russia any longer. Leaving my exile in Western Europe, I journeyed back, passing through Kiev in my Ukrainian homeland, and arrived in St. Petersburg in the spring of 1905. My heart was heavy, but my resolve was strong. Back in St. Petersburg, I dove into writing for various underground newspapers linked to the Mensheviks. These activities, however, put me in the crosshairs of the Tsarist regime. The threat of arrest loomed large, and within weeks I found myself escaping to the relative safety of rural Finland. That year was a whirlwind. I moved between Finland and St. Petersburg, taking charge of the Russian Gazette and growing its readership to 500,000. It was during this time that I played a pivotal role in establishing Soviets, or councils of workers representing the factory workers of the capital. By autumn, the St. Petersburg Soviet was a force to be reckoned with, openly defying the Tsarist regime. I even had the honor of temporarily serving as its chairman. My role as a writer and a leading agitator, however, landed me in prison again by late 1905. Many of us from the St. Petersburg Soviet were arrested. The following year was spent behind bars, and I was eventually convicted of inciting insurrection. In October 1906, fate saw me sentenced once more to hard labor in Siberia. But history has a way of repeating itself, and I didn't make it to Siberia. Escaping custody during the winter journey east, I eventually found my way back to London in 1907. Yet restless as ever, I soon moved to Vienna, which became my base for the next decade. In Vienna, I collaborated with the Russian Marxist and psychoanalyst Adolf Joffe, launching an underground Russian newspaper, Pravda, or Truth, which we smuggled into Russia. This period was also marked by attempts to reunite the fragmented Russian socialist movement. In 1912, Lenin held a conference in Prague, and I followed with a unification meeting in Vienna, though with limited success. My time in Vienna was not just about political maneuvering. I delved deeper into my theoretical understanding of Marxism. In 1908, I published Results and Prospects, an extension of my earlier thoughts formed in the aftermath of Bloody Sunday. This work outlined my theory of permanent revolution, a cornerstone of my contribution to Marxist thought. I argued that in Russia, unlike Marx's predictions, the bourgeoisie wouldn't spearhead the revolution. Instead, it would be the proletariat, the working class, who must carry the torch of revolution continuously until communism was achieved. This concept of permanent revolution profoundly impacted Marxist thought, extending beyond Russia's borders and throughout the 20th century. It laid the groundwork for what became known as Trotskyism, a subfield of Marxism emphasizing the need for continual revolution and proletarian agitation, even in more developed capitalist countries. While Trotskyism was still evolving, it marked a departure from Marx's vision of societal progression through distinct stages. Little did I know these ideas would shape the very fabric of revolutionary movements worldwide. In 1912, my time in Vienna was not just about political exile. I was deeply involved in covering the tumultuous events in the Balkans. The ethnic and class struggles unfolding there, particularly the Serbian army's ethnic cleansing against the Albanians, captivated my journalistic and revolutionary interests. But it was an incident in the summer of 1914 that escalated my journey in unforeseen ways. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of the Austro-Hungarian Empire set off a chain of events leading to the outbreak of the First World War. As a Russian in Austria-Hungary, I was forced to flee to neutral Switzerland, where I found Lenin, also in exile, after a stint in an Austrian prison. In Switzerland, I joined forces with the Swiss Socialist Party and authored The War of the International. In this book, I voiced my strong opposition to the war, setting me apart from many other socialist parties across Europe who had various reasons for supporting the conflict. My anti-war stance, ever a thorn in the side of authorities, led to my arrest in France in 1916 and subsequent deportation to neutral Spain. From Spain, my journey took another unexpected turn as I was deported again, this time to the United States. By early 1917, I found myself in the Bronx, New York City. However, it was during my time in New York that momentous events were unfolding back in Russia. The Tsar's mismanagement of the World War had brought the nation to the brink. Nicholas II's personal command of the armies, compounded by rampant inflation and food shortages, had pushed the populace towards desperation. Lenin, from his exile, was calling for the war effort to be turned into a civil war against the Tsarist regime. Back in Russia, distrust towards the Tsar's government was exacerbated by suspicions around the German-born Tsarina Alexandra and the controversial influence of Grigory Rasputin, who was assassinated in December 1916. The public's faith in the imperial family was at an all-time low. By early 1917, Petrograd was a powder keg. The city's population had swelled, filled with disaffected workers. Strikes and protests erupted, especially at the Putilov mill, the city's largest employer. What began as a strike over pay issues soon snowballed into a full-blown revolution. The situation escalated rapidly. With the Tsar away at the front, he ordered the army to quell the uprising, but many soldiers either refused or deserted. The Duma set up a committee to establish order, while a council of industrial workers, was being formed. Nicholas II, on his return, faced immense pressure and ultimately abdicated on March 15, 1917, in favor of his brother Michael. However, Michael, understanding the untenable situation, declined the throne the next day, effectively ending the Russian Empire. A provisional government led by Prince Lvov took power, but it was clear that a struggle for control was brewing between this new government and the more populist, socialist-leaning Petrograd Soviet. As I watched these events unfold from afar, I knew that my place was back in Russia, in the midst of this revolutionary maelstrom. The moment I heard of the upheaval in Russia, I knew I had to return. Leaving New York on March 27, 1917, my journey back was far from smooth. In the Atlantic, I was detained for a month in Nova Scotia at a British internment camp. Even there, my commitment to the workers' struggle didn't wane. I organized mass meetings and workers' agitation. By the end of April, the British government released me, and I finally reached Russia in mid-May. Back in Petrograd, the political landscape had transformed. Lenin had returned from Western Europe in April, swiftly establishing the Bolsheviks as a leading force post-February Revolution. Despite my previous non-alignment, I found myself increasingly drawn to Lenin's vision of overthrowing the provisional government for a socialist regime. During this tumultuous time, Lenin had to flee to Finland following government crackdowns. However, a failed military coup in September, led by General Lava Kornilov, changed everything. Lenin returned in October, and the Bolshevik Central Committee decided to revolt, spurred by military defeats and the German army's advance into Russia. My role in the ensuing revolution was critical. I authored a resolution passed by the Petrograd Soviet on October 22nd, calling for a military revolutionary center to protect Petrograd from military and civil threats. This action set the stage for the historic night of November 7, 1917, known as the October Revolution due to Russia's Julian calendar. As chairman of the Revolutionary Military Committee, I played a pivotal role in winning the support of the capital's garrison for the Bolsheviks. In just 24 hours, we had seized control of key government buildings, and by November 9th, the Winter Palace, the government's heart, was under our control. This marked the beginning of the Soviet state. In the days that followed, our new Soviet regime moved swiftly to establish control. Moscow fell in line by November 15th. We nationalized private property, banks, and even the vast properties of the Russian Orthodox Church. Factories were handed over to workers' Soviets who received pay rises and an 8-hour workday. Following the revolution, I was at the zenith of my influence, second only to Lenin. As the new People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs, my first challenge was addressing the dire situation of the war. I exposed the Trepelentente's plans to redistribute lands in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East post-war. This revelation effectively dissolved the alliance and left Russia to face Germany alone. As the People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs, I faced the daunting task of negotiating peace with Germany to end Russia's involvement in the First World War. The negotiations, which began in December 1917, were challenging from the outset. The Germans demanded severe terms, including the annexation of vast areas of the Russian Empire, encompassing modern-day Poland, Ukraine, and the Baltic region. Back in Petrograd, our government vehemently opposed these terms. However, by early 1918, we faced growing internal dissent and the looming threat of a major civil war. With the Russian army in disarray, we had little choice but to agree to most of Germany's demands in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Personally, I was against making territorial concessions to a capitalist regime. As a result, I abstained from voting on the decision to accept the German terms which I had helped negotiate. My hope had been that during the negotiations, the German proletariat would rise up and overthrow the Kaiser's government. Unfortunately, this hope proved to be in vain. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, signed on March 3, 1918, was a harsh blow to the young Soviet state. We ceded territories in Poland and the Baltic states of Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia to Germany, along with regions in the Caucasus and near the Caspian Sea to the Ottoman Empire. Furthermore, we recognized the independence of Finland, Ukraine, and Georgia, effectively losing over 1 million square miles of territory and 55 million people, not to mention significant industrial resources. Lenin described the treaty as a deep humiliation, but it bought us crucial time to consolidate our position against domestic threats. Indeed, those threats were growing rapidly as the Russian Civil War spread across the country. By the time we achieved peace with Germany, a diverse coalition had formed against us. This white army included aristocrats, czarist sympathizers, Cossacks, army officers, the Orthodox Church, centrists, and even some leftists who opposed the Bolsheviks. They received substantial foreign aid from Britain, France, the United States, and Japan. Meanwhile, other factions like the Black Army and Green Army emerged, particularly in Ukraine, fighting for local autonomy against our regime in Petrograd. In the wake of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, I found myself at a critical juncture. Days after the treaty's finalization in mid-March, I resigned as the People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs. Immediately after, I was appointed as the People's Commissar for Military and Naval Affairs. In the midst of the Civil War, I was now at the helm of the Soviet war effort. The Red Army faced daunting challenges. It was undersized and lacked professionalism. My first task was to launch a massive recruitment drive. Within 6 months, our ranks swelled from 300,000 to 1 million troops, and eventually, as new fronts opened, particularly against Polish separatists in the Polish-Soviet War, our numbers reached 3 million. My methods as commissar were often ruthless. I introduced blocking units, special forces, tasked with ensuring discipline among the frontline troops by preventing desertion or retreat, even if it meant gunning down our own soldiers. Reflecting on this years later in my autobiography, I acknowledged the grim necessity of such measures. An army cannot be built without reprisals. So long as men build armies and wage wars, the command will always need to enforce discipline, sometimes brutally. These blocking units remained a controversial aspect of the Red Army, resurfacing during the Second World War. But beyond this, my tenure as commissar also saw the endorsement of the Red Terror, a ruthless suppression of political dissent within the military and the utilization of labor camps to bolster the war effort. As a committed revolutionary and communist, I believed these harsh measures were justified in pursuit of a greater goal, the dismantling of the propertied classes and the birth of a new global socialist order. My approach during the Russian Revolution revealed a side of me that was fiercely pragmatic and at times savage, often clashing with my ideals for the rights of the proletariat. The methods I championed would shape the autocratic and violent character of the Soviet state in the years to come. In line with Marxist and socialist ideals, I firmly believed that the state should exert total control over the economy. My vision was for Russia to develop a command economy that would serve as a model for socialist states. However, despite my objections and those of other left-wing members of the Soviet leadership, the new economic policy, NEP, was adopted. This policy, quite contrary to my ideals, continued as the backbone of the Soviet economy until 1928. As the Civil War drew to a close, another crisis loomed on the horizon. Lenin's health was failing rapidly. Between May 1922 and March 1923, he suffered 3 strokes, leading to partial paralysis and loss of speech. When he died on January 21st, 1924, the question of his successor had already been a matter of intense internal debate. Since the October Revolution, I had been perceived as the second in command, a natural successor to Lenin, especially given my leadership role in the Red Army. However, the dynamics within the Politburo were shifting. Despite my intellectual prowess, I wasn't the most adept politician. Stalin, on the other hand, was a master of political maneuvering. As Lenin's health worsened from 1921, Stalin had secured the influential position of General Secretary of the Central Committee. He used this role to build a formidable base of support within the government. By the time of Lenin's death in 1924, Stalin had already consolidated significant power, strategically placing his supporters in key positions and forming alliances within the Politburo. Lenin, aware of Stalin's ambitions, had expressed concerns. In 1923, just before his final stroke, he altered his will, warning the party about Stalin and indicating his preference for me as his successor. But by mid-1923, Stalin's grip on power was too strong. His influence extended deep into the party's structure, and his alliances in the Politburo remained steadfast. Lenin's death did not immediately alter the workings of the Soviet government. For months before his passing, he had been incapacitated, and the Politburo continued to govern collectively. But beneath this facade of collective leadership, a different reality was taking shape. The troika of Stalin, Kamenev, and Zinoviev was now effectively dictating the Politburo's decisions. The stage was set for a power struggle that would define the future of the Soviet state. A year after Lenin's death, on January 6, 1925, my diminished position within the Soviet regime became painfully evident. I was removed from my role as Commissar of Military and Naval Affairs and stripped of my chairmanship of the Revolutionary Military Council. Once a decisive figure in the October Revolution, I was now merely a nominal member of the Politburo, increasingly ostracized from any real power. Stalin's rift with Kamenev and Zinoviev marked the final power struggles of the post-Lenin era, and with it, the last chapter of my revolutionary career in Russia. At the Bolshevik Party's 14th Congress in Moscow in December 1925, I joined forces with Kamenev and Zinoviev against Stalin to form the new opposition. Our speeches at the Congress revealed a desperate battle for control, but Stalin emerged victorious. The definitive end of any opposition to Stalin's rule came in 1927. In October, Zinoviev and I were expelled from the Central Committee. Attempts to organize a counter-celebrations for the 10th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution were quashed by the police, and soon after, we were expelled from the Communist Party. Kamenev and Zinoviev eventually capitulated to Stalin at the 15th Party Congress in December 1927. I refused to yield and was exiled to Kazakhstan before being deported to Turkey in 1929. It was then that I, a lifelong revolutionary, found myself once again in exile, never to return to Russia. My fate, however, may have been more fortunate than those who remained under Stalin's tightening grip. Russia in the 1930s descended into a state of paranoia, terror, and bloodshed. Many of those who supported my approach to communism faced harsh labor in Siberia, or worse, were erased by Stalin's regime. The Moscow show trials epitomized this reign of terror. Following the assassination of Sergei Kirov in December 1934, my old allies, Kamenev and Zinoviev, were implicated, tried, and executed in August 1936. The Great Purge that followed in 1937 and 1938 was a harrowing climax of Stalin's campaign to eliminate all opposition. Branded as Trotskyists or enemies of the state, countless individuals were executed or perished in the brutal conditions of the Gulag. By the time it ended, over 1 million people had lost their lives in this relentless purge. After leaving Russia, I outlived many of those who remained and opposed Stalin. My journey took me to Turkey, where I spent 4 years, followed by 2 years in France, between 1933 and 1935. However, under pressure from the Soviet government, the French authorities forced me to leave, and I found temporary refuge in Norway. Yet, once again, political pressure prevailed, and in 1937, I was deported to Mexico, my final place of exile, where I would spend the last years of my life. But even in exile, I was far from idle. I continued writing extensively, producing works like The History of the Russian Revolution and my autobiography. In Mexico, I collaborated with the Socialist Workers' Party of the United States and garnered support among members of the Chinese Communist Party, which was engaged in its own struggle for control in China. In 1938, I founded the Fourth International, aiming to create a communist and internationalist movement in stark opposition to Stalin's Comintern. My continued activism and unrelenting commitment to the revolutionary cause, however, ultimately led to my demise. Stalin's paranoia, which had engulfed Russia in the 1930s, extended even to my sanctuary in Mexico City. On May 24, 1940, I narrowly survived an assassination attempt by Stalinist agents. But they were persistent, and on August 20th, 1940, Ramon Mercader, another Stalinist agent, succeeded in his mission. He infiltrated my home and struck me with an ice axe. The attack was not immediately fatal, but I succumbed to my injuries the next day in a Mexico City hospital. Thus ended my life's journey from Lev Bronstein to Leon Trotsky. My life was a testament to my commitment to socialism and communism, marked by exile, revolutionary struggle, and a relentless pursuit of my ideals. From the depths of Siberia to the halls of power in Russia, and from the intellectual circles of London and Vienna to the streets of New York and Mexico City, I devoted my life to the cause of the proletariat. My legacy lives on, not just in the Soviet history I helped shape, but also in my theoretical contributions, particularly the theory of permanent revolution, which continued to influence communist thinkers globally in Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America for decades. My life was defined by a fierce dedication to a cause I believed in deeply. Through my writings, my actions, and my unwavering commitment, I sought to ignite a fire of change, one that would burn across nations and eras. The story of my life is a testament to the power of conviction, the complexity of politics, and the enduring nature of ideas. If you followed this journey, seen the triumphs and the tragedies, the victories and the defeats, I hope you found something that resonates, something that sparks a thought or ignites a conversation. Maybe you've gained a new perspective on the tumultuous times that shaped our modern world, or perhaps you found inspiration in the relentless pursuit of a cause. As you reflect on this tale, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. What part of my story struck you the most? Do you see echoes of these historic struggles in today's world? Your insights and reflections are invaluable as we continue to explore the complex tapestry of history. And if you found this journey through history compelling, consider subscribing for more such narratives. Each story, each figure from the past brings a new understanding of the world we inhabit today. Don't forget to like and share this story, for in the sharing of these tales, we keep the lessons of the past alive, lessons that shape our understanding of the world and guide us as we navigate the future. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Your engagement is not just with a story from the past. It's a dialogue with history, a conversation that transcends time and continues to influence our present and future.